So today, as Madeline mentioned, we are going to be talking about segmentable inventory, just to kind of set the table here on how this is going to work really for any of the future Feature Friday events that we hold. I think really it's distilled down to these four chapters. What is it? Obviously very important. And then getting in a little bit into how does it work. This is not meant to be a training session, but obviously getting exposed to a little bit of the how and the why is important as well. And then 3, I think, is kind of the unsung hero here. How do I start using it? And I know from experience that sometimes even the most innocuous, little seeming features can have a big barrier of entry when it comes to adoption. You introduce one checkbox and it seems like, okay, well, it's just, check the box and click save. That checkbox may represent, retraining your staff or, rejigging the operational tasks that are on either side of that workflow. So we're trying to illustrate as part of this series, from a generalized perspective, how do I start using this feature? And after that, we're hoping to leave some time today for some question and answers. So keep that in mind. Towards the end of the event, we're definitely going to be checking out the chat and making sure we can answer anything that may not have been clear from the extent of the presentation. So we'll kick it off with what is it? So segmentable inventory is simply a purpose-built solution for what has traditionally been a very challenging type of inventory to track efficiently and effectively. Primarily what we're talking about here is spooled items. So things that show up in your warehouse on a spool. So things like cable, fiber, ducting, that kind of thing. And what's important here is we've designed this in a way where you can track these things effectively in Sonar throughout their entire life cycle, from purchasing to deployment and everything in between. And also, it is important to note that you want to track it, but you also want to track metadata with it. So things like batch numbers, serial numbers, what things cost. Very, very important. Surfacing this data not only in the user interface, but also getting it access to the advanced reporting. Obviously, these days, there's a lot of discussion around funding. If your organization has been lucky enough to be granted any kind of public funding, you're going to be aware that there's no such thing as a free lunch. So this money is obviously very helpful to accelerate, to allow you to continue to spread connectivity in the communities that you serve, and that's all very wonderful. But it comes with very hefty reporting requirements. And at the end of the day, we're aware that so much of that activity happens within Sonar. We want you to be able to easily surface that information, build the reports that you need, and this is really built in a way where we want to facilitate that for you. And also, I'm aware I've spoken with operators. It may not be public money. Sometimes if your private funding, sometimes those private investors are just as, if not more keen to really dig into the details. And again, this is kind of in spirit of that. And as well, I will mention, I think, certainly the examples I'll be using from here on out are going to be around spooled items. I think fiber is the example that we pulled in. But this is for things that undergo what I like to refer to as inventory mitosis. So you order it and it shows up as a single thing, but throughout its life cycle, it ends up being multiple things. So obviously, like that graphic on the screen, as you dole out lengths of cable and fiber, lash it up on poles, whatever the case may be. That's multiple items. And that's where the challenge came in terms of how is this being tracked in Sonar. So just a little bit of table setting here before we get in. As part of this release, we did shift some terminologies, and I'm going to get into what these two things mean in case you're not intimately familiar, but just wanted to set the table because these terms have shifted somewhat recently. And from here on out, I will be using the new terminology. So what was formerly referred to as an inventory item is now a trackable inventory item. And what was formerly referred to as a generic inventory item is now a consumable inventory item. So previously in Sonar, consumable could be used for cabling or fiber if you wished. However, no record persists once the inventory is consumed. So it's just kind of dust in the wind. And there's no option to record metadata either, which speaks to the first point. Why would you want to record metadata if it's just dust in the wind? So what do we use consumable for? Well, if you are looking to track where your cable's going and the value that it represents and all that good stuff, certainly you don't want to be using consumable, but it is useful for things like, caulking, for example, or bolts, that kind of thing. You need to track it in Sonar because you need to make sure that you purchase it and that that there's enough on the trucks and that when you run out, so you can order more. But you're not gonna put 7 bolts were used at the Joneses house and see those 7 bolt items sitting under the inventory tab. It just doesn't make sense. So that's what consumables for. Trackable, on the other hand, it can be assigned to an entity and reported against, which is obviously very important for anything that you do want to be able to keep an eye on over time. And it can have the purchase price defined, purchase order associations, any sort of custom data fields, etc. You can have that represented with trackable. So trackable obviously sounds like a better fit for this, but it did fall short, and we're going to talk about that. I think the easiest way to explain where it fell short, you weren't able to reflect the full life cycle of the spool, at least without a ton of work. So again, back to my example, you order a 1,000-foot spool, but you're going to be deploying it all over the place until you run out of it. There were workarounds to get around this, but they weren't great. So a couple examples of workarounds: you could add that 1,000-foot spool as a single inventory item. And then when you deploy 200 feet of it, for example, if you were tracking length, you could go back and edit the metadata field that has the length, and you could change that from 1,000 to 800. And you would go and create a new item for that 200-foot piece. What I just described there is pretty involved, especially if it's happening in the field. It's a pain in the butt, right? So that's not a real world-class workflow to support this. And then arguably even worse, I've seen this as well, and I understand why, because each has its pro and con. Instead of making one 1,000-foot spool item when you receive that spool, you could make 1,000 1-foot inventory items. And that way you don't have to do that modification that I described. However, if you assign those 200 feet to a network site and you go to the inventory tab on the network site, you're going to have 200 of those items. So again, that's not exactly the workflow that I would describe as ideal. And that's what led us to the segmentable inventory. So now we're going to get into how it works. With this, I kind of cherry picked, I think, what are the main workflows, just illustrating those within the Sonar interface so you can really catch a vibe as to how that goes. I'm going to be bringing some videos full screen and narrating over them. Within the interface of our live stream platform here, you do have the ability to go in the corner and bring this screen share to a total full screen as well. You may want to do that depending, just because we are looking at the full Sonar interface, but we'll do our best to make that accessible for you. So this first workflow we're going to walk through is just creating the segmentable inventory model. This is, of course, if you're familiar with Sonar's inventory approach in general, this is going to be driven from the model itself. So you can see here we are adding the model, and at the top you'll see that we have some radio buttons, trackable and consumable, like we talked about before. Just to be clear, segmentable is an option under trackable. It is not available under consumable for the reasons aforementioned. So we've selected segmentable here, and when we check that box, a couple of new fields reveal themselves. One is for quantity, and this is really just a default field. So my example uses a 1,000-foot spool of cable, so we'll enter 1,000 here. And the unit of measure, this represents, exactly that. So you'll see here that there are common length measurements, obviously with the anticipation that this is going to be primarily used for spooled items. However, there is also a kind of a generic option there for each, for maybe something that's not on a spool that undergoes inventory mitosis. So in this case, we are going to select feet. We'll choose ourselves a little icon there, select our preferred vendor, and just define the inventory model as we ordinarily would do. So we're going to call this outside plant fiber, throw in the model name, throw in the display name, and I believe that's all we need to do to create the model. Now, I talked about the ability to modify fields, adding additional metadata fields. We're going to throw in a batch code field here. So this can be useful for situations where maybe there is a recall from the manufacturer on cable or fiber. You want to be able to track that, and you want that to track automatically throughout the life cycle of the spool and wherever it gets deployed all across your network. So we're going to add that. We're going to make that a required field because we definitely want to track it. We're going to make it the primary field because it's the only one and we want to view it in the UI. And we're setting it to unique none because you may order multiple spools with the same from the same batch, right? So we're going to apply that off and close this. And now we have that segmentable model available in the user interface here. So we're going to move on to the next workflow, which is purchasing a spool. So, this can also be just adding the spool in as inventory, but we're going to illustrate how that works when you are actually buying it through the purchase orders module. So we're creating a new purchase order, choosing the group. There's our vendor that we had associated it with before. And we're going to, just for simplicity's sake, order a single 1,000 foot spool of this. You can see that it inherited the purchase price there as defined, 5,000, and we're going to click create. So we've got that spool that is ready to go. And once it's been purchased, we are going to receive it. Receiving, if you're not familiar with Sonar's purchase orders module, is a means of reconciling the purchase order, showing that, yes, I've actually received what I have ordered, but also it's going to automatically create the corresponding inventory item in Sonar for that. So clicking receive, you can see that it's inherited the default inventory location. In this case, now we're going to put it in the Evergreen warehouse instead. It's a quantity of 1. There's our batch code field. So it's going to force us, you see the asterisk there, it's going to force us to throw in a batch code. And you can see that we have the ability to override the purchase price as well as the length of the spool. So I would say ordinarily you're not going to need to do that. But let's say you ordered that 1,000 foot spool and you got a call from your supplier and they said, hey, unfortunately, we're all out of that. I've got an 850 foot spool here. It's had some cutoff. Is that useful to you? And you say, yeah, we have a project coming up. I absolutely need that. When you're receiving that item, you can reflect the purchase price, whatever was agreed upon for that shorter spool. You can correct the measurement, and that way you've got exactly what you need represented in Sonar, mirrored to the reality of what's sitting on your warehouse floor there. So we have created that item. Now we can actually see what that looks like in Sonar. So this is going to run us through, and this is where it kind of diverges. So everything I've shown you so far, that's all typical to our regular process for trackable inventory. This is where things get different. So we're going to create a segment. So first of all, you can see here in the table, this is the inventory item that was created through the purchase order receiving process. So we're going to click on that. And when we click on that, you'll see that there is a new segments tab. We go into there and we can create a segment from there. However, just in case you prefer the workflow, when you're in the table, if you click the down caret arrow, you can see in the menu there is that edit segments option, which is going to bring you, when clicked, into this table where you can add a segment. So we're going to do just that. So first of all, we got to choose, where is this segment going to live? We're going to put it on a vehicle in this place because we're going to be doling out that cable, cutting it off, and then going out into the world to deploy it. So we've chosen the vehicle we want, and we're going to do a 100 foot segment from that 1,000 foot spool. And this is where things get interesting. Click create. A couple things observable here. You can see, obviously, we've created that 1,000 foot measurement, but you can see at the top there, the remaining feet has incremented down to 900. So this is where the automatic tracking comes into play. You are going to have that running total reflect whatever has been taken off of the spool without having to do anything manually. Another thing to take note of is that the cost, that's 1/10 of a $5,000 spool, that's now $500. So that is automatically taken care of as well. And then of course the batch code and that metadata will also be pulled down to that segment that was created. So hopefully you're starting to see how this really brings together some automation and some really desirable workflows. So we've created a segment. What happens if we want to edit it, right? If you've got a record in Sonar and it exists, you probably want the ability to edit it. And this is where, probably what seems to be a pretty simple concept on the surface, some differences start to kind of reveal themselves. And we'll see that here in a second. So editing that segment we just created, obviously you can change the assignees if you wanted to go on a warehouse shelf or into an account or whatever, you can do that. But you can also edit the length, and we'll talk through that here. So let's change that from the original 100 feet to 55. So when we do that, we populate that, you're going to see a couple of options here at the bottom. The first one is to adjust the parent quantity of the segment. So in other words, I would say this would be you had intended to dole out 100 feet, but you actually doled out 55, and then you cut it and you went, oh, darn. This will adjust the record in Sonar. That'll kind of roll back the change. It'll put that additional 45 feet back on the spool, as it were. The second option that we have here is to create a new segment with the difference. So this would be, you did dole out that 100 feet initially, but then you realize, oh, I'm only going to need 55 of it. So you make a cut, and now you have 3 items essentially. So we're going to use that example because it's a bit more complicated. So when we click that create a new segment with the difference option, a couple new fields have revealed themselves below. You've got basically you have to choose where that's going to go. So in this case, carrying on with my example, we're going to take the 55-foot segment with us onto the job site, and we're going to leave that additional 45-foot segment on the shelves of Evergreen Warehouse. So we've established that. We're going to click save, and you can observe here a couple of things. Again, automatically, our lengths have been adjusted based on what we asked for, and the costs proportionately have been reflected to that as well. And then, of course, the original spool remains the same. So that's how you edit a segment. Now, moving on from that, we have I want to show what it looks like to view a segment. For the example, we had the one that was on the vehicle. We're just going to click into that vehicle because it's assigned there. And I just want to show how the segments look within an inventory table. So we'll click on the inventory items of the truck. Truck's got a lot of stuff. We're going to scroll all the way to the bottom, and we can see that segment that we just created there. And within that table, you can see obviously the kind of the primary data, how long is it? What's the value? And then within that table, you can also see all of your information pertaining to the parent of it. So you can see, the manufacturer, what the current footage is on that. And if we click to reveal the sidebar, you can even get into some more detailed information, such as the relationship to the purchase order. So you can actually draw that right back to the genesis of that item. How did it get into Sonar? Who created the purchase order? Who approved it? What inventory location was it ordered to? And all that good stuff there. So that is how a segment actually presents itself within the application. So moving on from that, I did want to have a nod here to the mobile app. Certainly those workflows that I just described are not just incumbent to workflows that would make sense to a desktop user. So you can be in the field creating segments and modifying segments, right? Mobile app support was essential with this. So we are fast following the recent release of Segmentable Inventory to our web application into our Technician mobile app as well. So you can see here on the screen those 3 screen grabs showing some different interactions. You can create a segment, modify the item. You can edit the segment just like you can in the web application. And of course, you can do multiple assignment changes with segments and that kind of thing. So we don't have a date for that yet. It is a little bit squishy dealing with the app stores in terms of knowing precisely when that's going to land. But as you can see from what's on the screen here, the development work on this is done. It's just a matter of timing when it will actually show up in the app stores. So certainly keep an eye out for that. And that should, not inhibit your ability to adopt this across the board, because it will be in the mobile app as well. So speaking of adoption, how do I start using this? This will vary from customer to customer for sure. But I think broadly it falls into these kind of 4 stages, and I'll talk through these at a high level as well. So just to call out, I demonstrated how you would create a model. I did not demonstrate how to modify an existing model that was for cable to become segmentable. And the reason for that is quite simple. You cannot do that. You're going to have to create fresh models as segmentable, which means you're going to have to phase out the old ones. The reason for that is obviously the inventory items are driven from the model. So when you start modifying the model, there are certain data implications on kind of subsequent modifications that would need to be made to the inventory items, which really jeopardizes kind of the sanctity of those items and that data. And it really just makes things get pretty messy, for lack of a better term. So this is a case where we're going to be creating new models and phasing out. So obviously step 1 would be creating those new models. Anything you want to be segmentable, you're going to want to create those. And from that point on, I would say your next best step is to inform your staff. So like I was saying earlier, adoption, a lot of the time the adoption challenges are just like getting everyone on board with the changes, whether that's just socializing it, you're getting everyone around a computer and just showing them and explaining what's going to be different, or if you take more formal approaches and you have manuals or training videos or whatever, you may have to go in and modify those in order to make sure that your staff have the resources they need in order to properly carry out these workflows that include the new segments concept. So you got to let your staff know right away about that. So once you've done that, obviously the order of operations here, I think I would create the new models first, because then as you're describing this, you can show them, they can go into Sonar, check them out for themselves. You could even do some test models if you wanted to let people get hands-on. And just a note as well, you can create a new model and you can disable it. Disabling means that you essentially can't create any new inventory items against it. So that's a way to get that record in Sonar so your staff can check it out and get hands-on without the liability of having things incidentally being created against it if you aren't ready for that yet. So let's say your staff are all up to speed, you're ready to go. You're going to want to phase out the old models, phase in the new models. So if you did what I just described there, where you had disabled your newly created models, you're going to want to disable your old models, create your new models. And again, just to be clear, when you disable an old inventory model, you are not affecting the ability to interact with any of the items that may exist in the system against that old model. All you're doing is making sure that no new items can be created against that old model. So it's a very elegant way to kind of phase the new in and phase the old out. So when you do that, just make sure that you've enabled your new models, and then you're going to launch the models. Launch, I put in quotes there because launch isn't really like a term, like disable, create. Those are all actually, software actions that you can do within Sonar. Launch is more of a Mobius concept, I guess. But the idea is you're going to need to make sure that any of your connections, like for example, if you're using the purchase orders module, you're going to make sure that the new model is available for purchase. So when you are putting any new purchases in for your fiber, your cable, etc., it's going to be using those new models. And when you receive them and you create those new items, you have that happening against the new one. And there's other activities similar to that where you just have to make sure that everything is related to the new model. So broadly, 40,000 feet, that's the process that I would say you're best to follow for that. And that brings us to any questions that we may have. I'm not sure, Madeline, if you've got anything that came in, but happy to field anything.
Yeah. So I didn't see anything come through on the comments, but people might think of things later. For now, I certainly have a question for you, and it's a little bit of a preview. We'll keep it quick because we are going to be done here in about 2 minutes. But you mentioned that segmented data can be incorporated into reporting, and we've got a really exciting new feature coming out very soon called Data Connect. Can you tell us a little bit about Data Connect as a preview and how segmented inventory might fit into that?
Awesome question. Absolutely. So Data Connect, for those that have not heard the rumblings, it is the ability for you to use your own business intelligence platform to tap into Sonar and use Sonar data natively. The main value proposition here is a lot of organizations, yes, there's a lot of data in Sonar, but there's probably other systems that you're using that have data as well. And you want to kind of establish a way of building reports that are amalgamating Sonar data with non-Sonar data. Traditionally, to do that, you'd have to pull an export from Sonar and then pull it from the other system and merge them together. So messy, right? So this is the ability to directly read the database in Sonar and do that on your BI platform of choice, whether that be Power BI or Tableau or Looker or whatever. So I guess the question is, can this data be leveraged by that? Emphatic yes, absolutely. Really, we've designed Data Connect where any of the data that you can incorporate to the native reports, you can incorporate into your Data Connect reports.
Amazing. That's so excited. So with that, I'm going to wrap things up. Thank you everyone for joining us. If you do think of any questions that weren't answered today with the demonstration, you think you're going to need help with implementation of this feature, or just wondering if it's right for you, please shoot a message to your CRM. They will be more than happy to help you. And we will be back again the last Friday of next month to do another free feature Friday. So keep your eyes peeled on your inbox for that invitation and some information about what we're going to be covering. So thank you so much again. Thank you to Rick. That was amazing. And I hope everyone has a great weekend.
Thank you, Madeline. Thanks, everybody. Take care.